By December 1944, after months of bitter fighting and massive casualties, the Allied advance that began on the beaches of Normandy had pushed German forces back toward their homeland. Paris was liberated. The crucial port of Antwerp was in Allied hands, and many believed Germany's defeat was only weeks away. The worst, it seemed, lay behind them. Yet beneath the quiet hush of a deepening winter, Europe's battered fields and forests concealed a terrible secret. Unseen by Allied eyes, a desperate foe was preparing one last savage offensive, a sudden strike through the heart of the Ardennes. While one might wonder why the Allies didn't simply push through France and across the Rhine into Germany, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower's broad front strategy meant advancing from multiple directions at once. To the north, Allied forces sought to secure critical supply routes through Belgium, Luxembourg, and the dense Ardennes region, rather than funneling all their strength into a single axis of attack. This approach aimed to maintain pressure along a broad line, stretch German defenses thin, and eventually break them outright. But in these rugged hills and dark forests, long considered unsuitable for major armored operations, the enemy would find the cover it needed to attempt one final gamble. Welcome to Megatherium Club. On this channel, I draw on my experience at the Smithsonian Institution and the National Park Service to bring history and national parks to life, helping you to explore these incredible places firsthand. However, I must emphasize that I am not a specialist in World War II history. This video will be an overview that highlights the major events and themes of the Battle of the Bulge. If you're seeking more tactical detail or specifics on particular units, I encourage you to visit these sites in person, stand in the forests, explore the valleys, and speak to experts. My goal here is to guide and inspire, showing you where to begin. In our last video, we covered the D-Day landings, and now, on the 80th anniversary of the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States in Western Europe, we turn to another decisive moment. 6 months after our journey across the beaches of Normandy, we find ourselves in the Ardennes, a borderland where Belgium, Luxembourg, France, and Germany converge. This landscape, shaped by wooded hills and river-cut valleys, served as the stage for what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Long considered a natural fortress due to its dense forest and difficult terrain, the Ardennes seemed like an unlikely place for tank warfare. Yet in December 1944, under thick fog and amongst one of the coldest winters in decades, nearly 250,000 German troops would surge unexpectedly into this quiet sector, intent on shattering Allied lines. The Ardennes sector was considered a quiet front, a place where battle-weary American divisions could recuperate, integrate fresh replacements, and prepare for the final push into Germany. This 75-mile stretch of forest was held by 4 American divisions, spread thinly across the rugged, frozen landscape. Veteran soldiers settled into routines, believing they were facing understrength German units made up mostly of conscripts, elderly men, and inexperienced youth. Many were looking forward to celebrating Christmas, and some units even planned small holiday parties. In the broader Allied plan, resources and attention were focused elsewhere, farther north where tougher German resistance had been anticipated. The Ardennes, by contrast, was considered a secondary front, lightly held and not thought to be a prime candidate for a major attack. This perception created a sense of complacency and contributed to what many troops referred to as the Ghost Front. Here along the banks of the River, we find a crucial vantage point for understanding the illusion of calm that prevailed in December 1944. Forming part of the border between Luxembourg and Germany, the River was more than just a picturesque landmark. It served as a natural boundary the Allies believed would deter significant enemy movement. With few easy crossing points and steep valley walls, this river was seen as a buffer that would slow any major German advance. Yet this confidence would soon prove misplaced. The Germans, who had meticulously planned their offensive for months, intended to exploit these limited crossing sites with speed and surprise, turning what the Allies viewed as a barrier into a gateway for their attack. But appearances were deceiving. While American forces thought they were in a period of relative calm, the German High Command had been planning a massive counteroffensive since September. Hitler had assembled his last strategic reserves, pulling in elite SS Panzer divisions from other fronts, moving them secretly by night and under strict radio silence to avoid detection. The objective? To strike through the Ardennes, splitting the Allied lines and seizing the critical port of Antwerp. The German troops had trained extensively for this mission. They studied terrain models that showed every road, trail, and potential obstacle through the Ardennes. Maps were detailed, and each unit had clear objectives, with many expected to advance 50 miles in just 2 days. Unlike typical offensives, there would be no probing attacks or preliminary bombardments to alert the enemy. When the attack began, it would be sudden, overwhelming, and unprecedented. For the American soldiers holding their positions along the Ghost Front, December 15th seemed like any other night. The front line was quiet and morale was high. Some soldiers were opening packages from home, filled with holiday treats, and many were expecting a relatively uneventful Christmas. The forests were blanketed with snow, and a thick winter fog had rolled in, reducing visibility. No one suspected that mere miles away, 20 German divisions were moving into their final attack positions. The German attack force was formidable. Veteran units from the Eastern Front, seasoned in the brutal conditions of Russia, were bolstered by the newest tanks and equipment. Specially trained commandos, dressed in captured American uniforms, were tasked with creating chaos behind Allied lines, sowing confusion, and sabotaging communication. Soon, the very terrain and river crossings the Allies counted on to keep them safe would become conduits for a relentless onslaught, upending all assumptions of a quiet holiday season and exposing the vulnerability beneath the calm before the storm. It was an ambitious and daring plan, one that depended entirely on achieving total surprise. The quiet was shattered in the early hours of December 16th. At 5:30 a.m., the German artillery opened fire, unleashing a ferocious barrage that targeted American positions along the broad front. Thousands of shells rained down, cutting through the fog-shrouded forest and ripping into trees, communication lines, and command posts with devastating precision. The earth shook, and the air filled with the deafening roars of explosions. Within moments, American units found their radios silent, their telephone lines severed, and the ability to communicate completely disrupted. Nestled in a valley dominated by its medieval castle, the command post of the 28th Infantry Division quickly became a focal point of the German assault. The castle, with its commanding view of the surrounding roads and valleys, had been transformed into a fortress by the Americans. Today, visitors can still see the restored castle standing proudly. But in December 1944, none of the defenders had expected the full brunt of the German offensive to fall upon the small picturesque town. At the first sound of artillery, soldiers scrambled to their positions, many still dazed from sleep. The medieval stone walls offered some protection, but soon the town was engulfed in battle. German infantry advanced through the fog, supported by panzer tanks that rumbled into the valley. American forces fought tenaciously, using every vantage point the ancient castle offered to hold back the German onslaught. For 3 days, they resisted overwhelming odds, delaying the enemy's progress and buying precious time for the Allied command to understand the scale of the attack. Just miles away, another drama was unfolding in the village of Hosingen. The men of Company F of the 110th Infantry Regiment had taken up positions around the village's water tower, which overlooked several crucial roadways. Standing at the water tower today, it's hard to envision the fierce struggle that once raged here. Yet during the attack, a single company held off an entire German division, turning this unassuming spot into a vital choke point that disrupted the entire offensive's timetable. The German plan had called for a swift breakthrough, but instead, they found themselves bogged down in costly battles for seemingly minor positions. The dense forest and heavy fog that had concealed their approach now became obstacles, hiding pockets of American resistance until German units were practically on top of them. Narrow roads hemmed by thick woods became perfect ambush points, where small groups of determined American soldiers could strike at the advancing armor. Despite their heroic efforts, the weight of the German assault was simply too great to be contained everywhere. By nightfall on December 17th, the fog began to lift, revealing the extent of the German advance. Roads were filled with German tanks, half-tracks, and infantry moving westward. Overcast skies still grounded Allied aircraft that might have blunted the offensive. And the defenders, isolated and outnumbered, faced an increasingly desperate situation. The Germans pressed on, driving deeper into Allied territory. Panic began to spread among American units as the scale of the attack became clear. Roadblocks were hastily erected, and orders were given to hold key crossroads at all costs. For those on the ground, it was a chaotic struggle for survival, with little sleep, dwindling supplies, and the constant threat of being overrun. Today we look upon these towns and valleys through the lens of history. It's difficult to imagine the terror and confusion of that December. But the scars of artillery and the courage of the defenders echo through the quiet landscapes, reminding us of the fierce, unexpected storm that had broken upon the Ardennes. The small Belgian town of Bastogne sat at the convergence of 7 key roads, which made it the focal point of the German advance and a vital strategic objective for both sides. If the Germans could capture Bastogne, they would have the means to split the Allied forces and push toward their ultimate goal, Antwerp. Recognizing the town's importance, Allied commanders instructed the 101st Airborne Division, the famous Screaming Eagles, to hold Bastogne at all costs. As German forces began to encircle Bastogne, the defenders found themselves with almost no time to prepare. Despite the urgency, the men of the 101st were resolute in their mission. They quickly established defensive positions around the downtown and key locations throughout the town. With scarce supplies, insufficient winter gear, and brutal combat ahead, they were determined to hold their ground. The town was soon surrounded, and the conditions grew dire. German artillery pounded American positions day and night, and infantry attacks were relentless. The defenders of Bastogne, isolated and cut off, were forced to ration their dwindling food and ammunition. Under these grim conditions, the paratroopers drew strength from their acting commander, General Anthony McAuliffe. When the Germans demanded surrender on December 22nd, his one-word reply, "Nuts!" became a rallying cry. This defiant refusal to capitulate not only boosted morale, but also became a cherished part of the town's identity. Today, Bastogne embraces this legacy with signs, souvenirs, and even a locally brewed beer bearing the famous phrase, reminding visitors how a single word encapsulated unwavering resolve. Various monuments now stand in Bastogne as a tribute to that moment of steadfast refusal. One honors General McAuliffe, and beside it stands an M4 Sherman tank nicknamed Barracuda, which provided much-needed firepower during the fiercest days of the siege. Visiting today, these memorials are set in the peaceful downtown square, a stark contrast to the chaos that once raged here. Street fighting around St. Peter's Church was some of the most brutal of the entire battle. Houses, churches, and shops became strong points, with both sides fighting inch by inch to control narrow streets that were never designed for armored warfare. The Americans took up positions behind rubble and in hastily constructed barricades, using whatever cover they could find to hold off the advancing enemy. German tanks attempted to force their way through, only to be ambushed at close quarters by small squads of Americans armed with bazookas and anti-tank grenades. On December 26th, after days of intense fighting and dwindling supplies, the first elements of General George S. Patton's Third Army fought their way to the outskirts of Bastogne. Patton's forces had not been positioned for an immediate response to the Ardennes offensive. Before the German assault began, they were operating further south, focused on pushing into Germany. When word of the attack reached Allied command, Patton was tasked with pivoting his entire army northward through treacherous winter conditions and congested roads to relieve Bastogne. It was a maneuver of remarkable speed and coordination, requiring Patton's units to disengage from their current operations, redeploy, and launch a new offensive under some of the worst weather conditions imaginable. Their arrival was greeted with cheers from the exhausted defenders, who had withstood relentless bombardment and encirclement. Though battered, Bastogne remained in American hands. The determination of the 101st Airborne Division to hold this crucial crossroads had been a linchpin in the battle. Among their ranks were men like those of Easy Company, immortalized in the book and miniseries Band of Brothers. These soldiers had held their line despite brutal cold, inadequate winter gear, and ceaseless enemy attacks. Easy Company was dug into the frozen earth of the Bois Jacques, a forested hill just outside Bastogne. Today, the 101st Airborne Museum in Bastogne offers visitors a powerful window into these experiences. Housed in a historic building that once served as an officer's mess, the museum preserves artifacts, uniforms, and personal items that bring the division's story to life. Multimedia displays, photographs, and recorded testimonies provide an intimate look into what it meant to hold the line against daunting odds. Its immersive basement recreation of bombings and artillery barrages places you face to face with the fear and uncertainty the defenders endured. Meanwhile, at the Bois Jacques, fenced-off foxholes still scar the forest floor, where interpretive panels help you imagine Easy Company's freezing nights under enemy fire. During the siege, these same woods offered only the barest shelter for the paratroopers. Artillery barrages that once shattered branches and flung splinters of bark are now long silent. Well-marked trails guide you past these preserved positions. It's here that the magnitude of Easy Company's ordeal truly resonates, as you reconcile the tranquil landscape with the desperate struggle that once raged beneath these branches. With Bastogne now secure, the Allies pressed the initiative. They pushed north and east, determined to reclaim ground lost in the initial German thrust. One early target was Foy, a small village just beyond Bastogne. Fierce engagements saw the Allies finally pry the Germans from their defensive positions. From there, American forces pushed onward, determined to break the enemy's momentum entirely. Throughout the region, monuments and memorials stand as silent witnesses to the battle's intensity. The Mardasson Memorial, a massive star-shaped tribute just outside Bastogne, honors the American servicemen who fought and fell here. Inscribed with the names of the U.S. states and units that took part, It commemorates the unity and the vast effort required to stem the German thrust. Adjacent to the memorial, the Bastogne War Museum immerses visitors in the broader context of the battle, presenting personal stories, artifacts, and interactive displays that unite the strategic overview with the deeply human toll of war. As the Allies advanced through places like St. Michael's Grotto, the once formidable German offensive began to unravel. The same terrain that had given the Germans their initial advantage, dense forests, winding roads, and hidden ravines, now impeded their retreat. Allied air power returned to the skies as the weather improved, and the combined pressure of American artillery, armor, and infantry battered the withdrawing Germans into disarray. By mid-January, the German lines had been driven back to their starting positions. The Battle of the Bulge, launched as a desperate bid to reverse the course of the war, had ended in failure for the Germans. For the Allies, the relief of Bastogne and the subsequent counterattack not only restored the integrity of the front lines, it solidified their path to final victory in Europe. And for future generations, the monuments, museums, and preserved foxholes ensure that the resolve, courage, and ultimate triumph formed in the snowy fields of the Ardennes will never be forgotten. The Battle of the Bulge was not just a military engagement. It was a story of endurance, sacrifice, and the resilience of the human spirit. It marked the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime, but its cost was immense. Over 80,000 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or went missing. The German casualties were similarly devastating. As the snows of that bitter winter finally receded, the true scope of the suffering emerged, etched into the forests and the fields of the Ardennes. Today, as we mark the 80th anniversary of the battle, visitors who journey here encounter a landscape dotted with monuments and memorials, each telling their own quiet tale. But more than that, the very land itself, made up of hills, rivers, and forests, is a silent custodian of memory, reminding us that this war was fought by individuals, not abstracts. At the German military cemetery, thousands of graves are lined in solemn rows, their dark crosses silhouetted against the gentle sky. Each marker speaks to the human cost paid on all sides. It is a place of introspection, one that acknowledges the shared tragedy of war, reminding us that every soldier buried here was once someone's child, friend, or brother. Crossing the border back from Belgium to Luxembourg lies another place of remembrance, the Luxembourg American Cemetery and Memorial. Here, over 5,000 American soldiers rest, many of whom fell during the Battle of the Bulge. Among them is the grave of General George S. Patton, who chose to remain alongside the men who followed him into the firestorm. Tended rows of white crosses and stars of David gleam in the sunlight. To walk between these rows is to confront the immense gravity of what occurred here. These are not distant names in a history book, but these are real lives offered up in defense of freedom. In these cemeteries and memorial sites, it becomes impossible to separate strategy and statistics from human lives and personal stories. The Battle of the Bulge was fought not only against an enemy army, but against a relentless winter that tested every limit of human endurance. As we reflect on the events that transpired here 80 years ago, we remember that the Allied victory did not come easily, nor was it inevitable. It was earned, inch by inch, life by life, beneath a sky heavy with snow and smoke. For those who seek understanding, the Ardennes offers more than historical fact. It provides a visceral connection to the generation that bore witness to one of history's darkest chapters and emerged stronger for it. And as we leave these quiet hills and sheltered valleys behind, we carry their stories with us. A reminder that even in the bleakest winter, there can still be hope.